yeah, I think we want to do that. Right? Yeah. Emily Dickinson has not usually been considered as a Civil War poet. She generally didn't deal with events going on in a way that you could directly tell that she was doing that. But her engagement with the war, her engagement with the war is typically oblique and indirect. Seeing it aslant was the term she used to say for things like that. But the war years were remarkably productive ones for her, as she wrote over 900 poems during the conflict. 900 poems. The following excerpt is from a documentary film called Angles of a Landscape. Emily Dickinson, Seeing New Englandly. Okay. This image, by the way, while it's getting started, I'm looking at it. This one right here, right? Now, this one is a fairly newly discovered image of Dickinson, and she is this person right here, and that's a friend of hers on the other side. Right? And that's kind of the classic image of Emily Dickinson next to her. Can you hear? All right? Okay.
By the early 1860s, the long-dreaded Civil War had begun, bringing loss and devastation even to small towns in New England far from the battlefields. The war affected Dickinson's poetry as news of distant violence reached her home. Then, as now, Amherst was a town noted for its vigorous talk of national events. The poet wrote to her literary friend Thomas Wentworth Higginson, abolitionist and commander of a black regiment from South Carolina, after she learned he had been wounded in 1864. I was surprised and anxious since receiving your note. The only news I know is bulletins all day from immortality. Of the 273 Amherst men who enlisted in the Union Army, 57 were killed in battle or died later of wounds or disease. 49 men were wounded and 9 captured, including students, alumni, and faculty of Amherst College. Many poems Dickinson wrote during this time contain images of blood, imprisonment, and suffering. Sorrow seems to me more general than it did, she wrote to her cousin Lou Norcross. With the whole country caught up in the fighting, nobody could evade the war's spreading stain. Emily Dickinson could not avoid confronting such violence. Newspapers, magazines, and the telegraph hastened the arrival of bad news. Civil War photographs, such as Matthew Brady's famous images of Antietam, were the first ones to show dead soldiers lying unburied on the battlefield. Oliver Wendell Holmes described these photographs in an 1863 Atlantic Monthly essay. Let him who wishes to know what war is look at this series of illustrations. These wrecks of manhood thrown together in careless heaps or ranged in ghastly rows for burial were alive but yesterday. Perhaps with Holmes's essay in mind, the poet wrote in 1863, "It feels a shame to be alive when men so brave are dead." Then the poem asks an unanswerable question. The price is great. sublimely paid? Do we deserve a thing that lives like dollars must be piled before we may obtain? Are we that weight sufficient worth that such enormous pearl as life dissolved be for us in battle's horrid bowl? Like thousands of families in both North and South, the Dickinsons dreaded finding familiar names among the lists of the dead. The poet worried about Fraser Stearns, the son of Amherst College's president and a close friend of her brother Austin. I hope that ruddy face won't be brought home frozen, she wrote to her cousin Lou in December 1861. But in late March 1862, the poet reported to Lou that Fraser had been killed at the Battle of New Bern. His big heart shot away by a minie-ball. He fell by the side of Professor Clark, his superior officer. When his body was brought home to Amherst, his casket was accompanied by his classmates marching in parade to guard his narrow face. Nobody here could look on Fraser, not even his father, she wrote. The doctors would not allow it. What she shared in her imagination with young soldiers was the sudden, ghastly surprise of death intruding upon a young, hopeful life. They dropped like flakes, they dropped like stars, like petals from a rose, when suddenly across the June a wind with fingers goes. Perished in the seamless grass, no eye could find the place, but God can summon every face on his repeal-list list. Emily Dickinson knew well the particular anguish of waiting. Emotional violence took a high toll on those at home. Suspense is hostiler than death. Death, though soever broad, is just death and cannot increase. Suspense does not conclude, but perishes to live anew, but just anew to die. Annihilation plated fresh with immortality. Unlike more public poets, such as Julia Ward Howe and Ralph Waldo Emerson, who exhorted their readers to a virtuous patriotism, Dickinson took the war into her imagination, leaving its horror and injustice unexplained. She described herself as singing off charnel steps. Flags are a brave sight, she wrote in 1862, perhaps thinking of Fraser Stearns' funeral in Amherst, but no true eye ever went by one steadily.
Always a master of ambiguity. Dickinson's poem, which I'm about to read, depicts an autumn scene and was published decades after the war as a seasonal poem in a children's magazine. But imagine how different it seemed in 1862 when it was composed right after the Battle of Antietam. The name of it is autumn. The hue of it is blood. An artery upon the hill, a vein along the road, great globules in the alleys, and oh, the shower of stain, when winds upset the basin and spill the scarlet rain. It sprinkles bonnets far below, it gathers ruddy pools, then eddies like a rose away upon vermilion wheels. The Civil War continued to evoke poetic responses long after the war, even to the present. Alan Tate's Ode to the Confederate Dead is a mid-20th century work by a poet who, if not exactly a Confederate sympathizer, did, along with several of his contemporaries, regret the wholesale disappearance of a decentralized agrarian Southern identity that they believed the war had endangered. So here's Tate's poem. You who have waited for the angry resolution of those desires that should be yours tomorrow, you know the unimportant shrift of death and praise the vision and praise the arrogant circumstance of those who fall, rank upon rank, hurry beyond decision, here by the sagging gate, stopped by the wall.
Later poets continue to explore this quintessential American experience. We will conclude with the work of two such poets. The first, Robert Hayden, served as Library of Congress poetry consultant, a position which later became the United States Poet Laureate. He was the first African American to hold that position. There he is. He had weak eyesight, as you can tell. Here he reads an elegy for Frederick Douglass.
This is from the Poetry Foundation, and if you go to this site, you'll find other recordings. This is from the Poetry Foundation.
Frederick Douglass was a very great man, a 19th century figure who was a voice for the Negro and who was a great and powerful human voice too. He was concerned with the freedom of women. He was concerned with all the progressive movements of his time. He was truly a very great American, and in this poem I try to pay homage to him. Frederick Douglass. When it is finally ours, this freedom, this liberty, this beautiful and terrible thing, needful to man as air, usable as earth, when it belongs at last to all, when it is truly instinct, brain matter, diastole, systole, reflex action, when it is finally won, when it is more than the gaudy mumbo-jumbo of politicians, this man, this Douglass, this former slave, this Negro beaten to his knees, exiled, visioning a world where none is lonely, none hunted, alien. This man, superb in love and logic, this man shall be remembered. Oh, not with statues rhetoric, not with legends and poems and wreaths of bronze alone, but with the lives grown out of his life, the lives fleshing his dream of the beautiful, needful thing.
We have his book here, another one of the giveaways tonight. If you go to the Poetry Foundation website, you can find his recordings in his voice. Sorry. You can find his recordings at the Poetry Foundation website, including, he has a very beautiful piece called The Middle Passage. It's a longer poem, but he's looking at the whole history of slavery in that piece. Natasha Trethewey currently holds the United States Poet Laureate position, which evolved from the Library of Congress consultancy. As a contemporary Southerner with racially mixed heritage, she was drawn to the Civil War, and her 2007 Pulitzer Prize-winning book, Native Guard, is named for a Union military unit that guarded white Confederate prisoners in Louisiana. And in this video, she reads from the poem, the elegy for the Native Guard.
We leave Gulfport at noon, gulls overhead trailing the boat, streamers, noisy fanfare, all the way to Ship Island. What we see first is the fort, its roof of grass, a lee, half reminder of the men who served there, a weathered monument to some of the dead. Inside we follow the ranger, hurried though we are to get to the beach. He tells of graves lost in the Gulf, the island split in half when Hurricane Camille hit, shows us casemates, cannons, the store that sells souvenirs, tokens of history long buried. The Daughters of the Confederacy has placed a plaque here at the fort's entrance, each Confederate soldier's name raised hard in bronze, no names carved for the Native Guards, 2nd Regiment, Union men, Black Phalanx. What is monument to their legacy? All the grave markers, all the crude headstones, water lost. Now fish dart among their bones, and we listen for what the waves intone. Only the fort remains, near 40 feet high, round, unfinished, half open to the sky. The elements, wind, rain, God's deliberate eye.
So as this announcer says, this is a story that needs to be told, and there are many stories that need to be told. The stories we've grown accustomed to are likely not the only ones, maybe not even the best stories. Trethewey's work is a testament to the ongoing need to find and tell the stories that may have been buried in the past. And that's where we'd like to conclude with these contemporary poets who are still addressing this material. And if you have questions for us, we'd be happy to carry on a discussion with you. Yes?